In this session, we'll discuss how to ingrain extreme adaptability into your products, moderated by Mailie Shortill. Mailie, all yours.
Thank you for the introduction. Joining me today to discuss how to ingrain extreme adaptability into your products is Kevin Trilli, Chief Product Officer from Mambu, and Ben Goldin, Chief Technology Officer. So starting with you, Ben, in a world of continuous evolution where change is the only constant, how do you make sure that you ingrain this adaptability into your organisation?
So being CTO, I will go a little bit one level into details on this one. I think adaptability is enabled through three things at least. That's culture, that's process, and the technology. And these are fundamental things the organization need to rethink or replan in order to really plan for the adaptability.
Thanks, Ben. And how about you, Kevin? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, building on those three important points, I think ultimately what we have here is an organization needs to build an instinct. And an instinct is based on what the future is going to bring to the company, what the company is going to evolve themselves, and trying to scenario plan that a little bit. So this really deep understanding of the trends in the market, the capabilities of your company, and building that gut feeling as an organization of what can you do and where you're going to have to go in the future, because at some point you're going to have to be adjusting to some of these changes in the environment. So that formation of an instinct, I think, is where it kind of all comes together.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I guess then in terms of mindset, what should you be considering?
In terms of mindset, it's important to remember that everything we do should be considered more or less as an experiment. We need to set a specific objective. We need to set specific measures how we're going to understand whether we are approaching that objective, and just try to experiment in a limited time frame, see whether that works, go next, evolve on that. So that's a very important change comparing to how we traditionally used to think about driving innovation or driving certain changes, where we would first plan it ahead in the great details, only then execute, and by the time we execute, we figure that actually the actual context has changed already, and the thing we are building is not relevant anymore. So that's one of the key things, I would say, from the mindset perspective.
Yeah, I'll add on that and say that this is a relation of strategic management. And as we all know, there's the chaos of business as usual. We have our existing customers, our existing pressures of running the company currently, and you have to make time for this. You've got to spend some thinking time to plan scenarios and do some models, and they don't need to be highly quantitative. Again, it goes back to an instinct. But if you don't, and you succumb to the pressure of business as usual, then you're going to miss the market. You're going to miss the trends. And that's where many companies don't catch the signals that eventually come and disrupt them, or the organization doesn't reposition itself appropriately and they become less nimble in the market. So that classic challenge of running the business and finding time to do strategic planning, as Ben was saying, it's critical, and many companies don't do it well, obviously.
And you briefly mentioned processes earlier. So how would you suggest, or do you agree that processes are a core part of adaptability? And if so, how?
Yeah, exactly. So it's easy to say in theory that companies should experiment, companies should innovate, companies should run in small cycles, but it's important to establish the process that would facilitate that and enable that, right? Things that we call agility or agile is of course very important, right? Not just for the technology, not just for the things related to how we build things in technical terms, but also in general how organization operates in a small plan, do, check, adopt cycles, where we really embed it into how we operate as an organization. So that's the process part.
And I would always say strategy is a process. It's not a point-in-time activity. You're making assumptions. You're trying to de-risk those assumptions. You're trying to build more knowledge of your market. And if you're not doing that systematically and improving it, you're just going to have this imperfect model for your company. And that might work for a point in time, but as this really complex set of factors that come into your company start to shift and you don't have those built into your models, you become less relevant. Exactly. So continually pushing your strategy process. And again, it could be a small part of time at the beginning and spike it at certain points, but it really needs to be a process you're doing periodically.
I would probably add just one other thing, that for adaptability to work, the entire organization needs to work like an orchestra, right? So all these principles that we just discussed, me and Kevin, they have to be applied throughout the entire organization and synchronized, which is even more important, right? So every part of the organization should be synchronized around this planning, checking, experimenting cycles, around what's important for the strategy and how this all links together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think perhaps part of the most important part of this, conversation is looking at the technology itself and really understanding how we adapt in this ever-changing environment for the ever-changing end consumer needs as well. So what are your thoughts on how technology really forms part of this true adaptability in our product organisation?
Yeah, I think on the macro level, the general principle is that it's important to build for the future and without trying to build the future in from the start, right? That's an important principle that then should drive every other technical decision. And we can, of course, go and discuss specific technological architectural styles like microservices versus monolith and things like that. But at the end of the day, this all links back to this fundamental principle. How can we build for evolution? How can we build in a way that we can easily replace, adapt, or change individual parts of the system? Right? How to make sure the system is decoupled around specific capabilities that serve individual parts of the business, rather than having one big thing that does everything. Right? And that's also stays pretty close to our composable banking approach that we are positioning, right, and that we are talking about in the context of Mambu platform. It kind of works exactly towards the same principle. How do we build for the ever-changing future without really building the future in today?
And I would say technology is clearly what you need to solve a evolution of your company and really scale and all those classic things that you hear about. But the thing you got to remember is technology is trying to solve a problem. So you've got to keep going back to saying, what is the problem space that we're designed in our market and our company to solve? And the job to be done, so to speak, and making sure that the technology is directly affecting that. And then there's, when you get through that first phase, then you're also saying, what can technology open up that maybe is not a current problem today that can enable something? So in classic expanding your value proposition concepts. And I think that's the beauty of a lot of what we're doing and together and other markets and other companies is they're looking at a multi-year plan and trying to think about the problems we're solving today with technology, how can we improve those? But if you start to have this technology, it enables new capabilities that maybe the market doesn't recognize they need today necessarily, but it's going to solve problem fundamentally different. And I think that two-stage thinking is one way to do it, is improve the job to be done today, open up and enable new capabilities in the future. That again helps your market.
Exactly. And I think fundamental shift today in the market in general is that earlier technology was basically just an enablement technique, right? How do you actually take your business process, how do you take your capability and then digitalize it, right? Or build it in the system. Today, technology is in the forefront of innovation. Today, technology enables business strategy and in a way steers and drives business strategy, because there's so much you can do today with the technology that you cannot simply imagine in a traditional world.
My final point I'll say is that technology delivers your value. And so you've got to think of how that is delivered to the market in addition to exactly what you're doing. And there's unique ways you can deliver your value proposition to the market. And again, in this changing chaos world that we're in, that becomes as important as the actual problem you're trying to solve.
Exactly.
Yeah, and ultimately we are here to provide that value for our customers. In conversations with customers and partners, I'm sure they come up with some very interesting conversations around innovation. So how would we ingrain this adaptability into innovation, knowing that innovation is kind of one side of the coin, but actually how do we make it work for us and work for our customers and work for our partners?
Yeah, and I think the key point we want to talk about here is the three components we started with. Innovation happens in all three of those. It's not just building a patent for some IP for the company. It's looking at your business model. It's looking at your org structure. It's looking at those full aspects. And again, as you mentioned, it's got to permeate across all the organization. I think a lot of companies and organizations think about just that R&D type innovation at the very tip of the spear of the product. But it's really all these aspects. And I think that as you consider that, your business model can be innovated as fundamentally, which it gets your product more out into the market and then solving more problems, getting more critical mass, and allows that to grow. So the innovation word needs to be used carefully. I think it's very difficult for many companies to do that, obviously. So if you think about it more holistically as the organization versus just the technical IP, there's lots of opportunities for that. And again, if you apply the same mindset, there's lots of opportunities to find differentiation in the market.
Yeah, exactly. From our specific context and our specific perspective, I might want to relate back to what I just mentioned before on the composability, right? and how innovation per se is an ability to constantly adapt to the ever-changing future, right? That's in a way is an innovation, right? Because if your technology doesn't enable you to really adapt to ever-changing future, you can't innovate, you stagnate, you become limited and constrained by what's there right now. So one of the important fundamental aspects of technology is really to enable that innovation, not only bring innovation.
Yeah, and I guess the level of disruption across the industry in general and how it affects our customers and how it affects their operating models, varies depending on the type of customer we're talking to and the type of solution we're offering. So in order to continue and to remain and have that competitive edge, what are your recommendations, not only for Mambu, for everyone listening to the summit, in terms of how you can stay that step ahead?
Yeah, absolutely. So from my perspective, the way I see it, the biggest competition and disruption today happens in the customer experience space, right? How the service is provided to the customer, and then end to end, not just from the technology perspective, but from the overall engagement perspective, from the service that surrounds that engagement perspective. So in order to stay competitive and remain competitive, the focus should be exactly on that side of the business, and then looking at the entire value chain, right, of technology, of things that you provide as an organization, and see how this enables you to do that, right? How every part of your organization, every part of your technology, your enterprise architecture, really enables you to stay focused on providing superior customer experiences across the board, end to end, from customer acquisition to all the other points in the life cycle of a customer journey.
I'll build on that and also complement it by saying agility, I think, is really important for companies, and that word applies to everything. So if you have a process that you've been doing for 10 plus years, and it could be an internal process, it might be aligned with the value and identity of your company, but at the same point, maybe it's time to relook at that. And if you're using a system for many, maybe decades, that's limiting you in terms of your ability to innovate and bring more value to the customer ultimately. And someone else is going to disrupt that in the market. And so you have to be in a situation where you can be agile, which means experimenting, which means allow your architecture shouldn't be keeping you handcuffed in terms of the things you can and can't do, to the type of people that you're bringing in the company and the way they think, all the way to the proactive decision making and risks you're taking as a company. All of that has to be ingrained. And if you're not agile in this as a whole organization, then the market's going to move past you at some point. And it's going to happen slowly at first, and then it's going to happen very abruptly. And it's the final point of this is that if you wait too long and try to do this from a slow moving position or standstill, it's really difficult to do. So you constantly need to be chipping away at this in a proactive way and making a few decisions and bets. And if you don't do that, it's much harder.
So you've both been in this industry for over 2 decades. Within that time, I'm sure you have, some great anecdotes and some great recommendations for how you've seen things maybe work very well or not work so well, in the topic of adaptability. I'd love for you both to share some examples from your past.
Sure, I can start. So let me maybe generalize it a little bit, right? What I've seen throughout my career is that traditional organizations, especially the ones that didn't yet adopted that different mindset and different technology and different processes, their biggest challenge is to compete with a modern, purely tech-driven organizations, right? And what are the key differences? Just as a consumer, everyone could observe these things. So with traditional organizations who are still running on a classic model, for you, let's say, to start the engagement, to get fully up to speed and get your service, you would sometimes need to come to the branch several times. You would need to bring a bunch of paper with you, especially if you want to get a bit more complex product like mortgage, talking about financial services specifically. And then if you compare that with a nimble tech company that would try to do the same, they obviously do not have that overall legacy in their mindset, in how they work in their technology, and they are naturally enabled to do things differently. They are naturally enabled to look at other tech companies like Google, like Netflix, see what these guys are doing, how they operate their business, how they provide their service, and sort of copy that approach into the traditional space, like banking, like financial services. So in that world, to open up an account and start banking with that company would take you sometimes up to 60 seconds, right? And we did great demos with some of our partners to showcase exactly that. How can you combine different technologies in different layers of the banking architecture to enable that type of journey? 60 seconds onboarding. And it's just the beginning. Then after that, 60 seconds onboarding, how fast can you get the credit? How fast can you actually engage with the customer support, ask questions if something doesn't work? Can you actually do that with a chatbot where you will get answers, automated answers right away? Right. So I was going to the point that the main, the main thing that prevents more traditional organizations who are yet at the beginning of the journey to get there is actually the three things that we spoke about, right? It's the technology, it's the mindset, it's the process. And we've seen that so many times in my current job, of course, in Mambu, but also previously throughout my entire career. These three things come across all the time, and these are the three things that hinders that innovation, that hinders that different approach to customer experience, right? So that would be my generic view how this relates.
Yeah, and I think if you look at both B2C and B2B, there's sort of like drivers that have made change in the last 20 years, and we'll go to B2C a little bit first, and of course there's B2B2C behind that, is convenience, right? Like I think of retailing and online buying, and so, you know, Amazon and those kind of things. Like we all got tired of going to a store and having to walk around and maybe find a product not in the right size. And then the whole world just changed once a SaaS platform came out that had an unlimited network effect to every product in the world. And so how do you predict that? That's very difficult to do. But there were trends of technology, SaaS in particular, and then APIs and things on the back end that connected all these retailers together, that if you started to use that technology trend, you would start to feel that something was going to happen there. And related to that, you go back to financial services of like who enjoyed going to a branch of a bank and sitting there in the lobby and waiting and going through that very painful process, right? So that again was end user convenience, that then you bring in mobile and you bring in the technologies of SaaS again, and I can interact with my financial institution. That changed the whole paradigm, and then suddenly you had to go further into that and make that the digital experience, and that's where the points that you were just talking about. So if you think about that side, you kind of get to the B2C drivers that were aided by technology around SaaS and APIs and all those familiar things we know about that in the financial services world are just now becoming mainstream. So you're starting to see those really go to the next level in the industry that we participate in. Mm-hmm. And on the B2B side, I think you start to think about flexibility and customization, and you look at maybe the CRM market, right? That where that was way back when with Siebel and all those folks, and the wave of Salesforce as this benefit of bringing a product that was easy to use, easy to set up, and then configurable, versus the old bloated software model where you had to customize it and distribute it across multiple sites in a company. And that just became the wave that just completely changed that industry and replicated that SaaS model across very familiar industries that we can probably list on our hands. So I think you start to see those drivers that come, whether it's an enterprise needing more flexibility and more control and better distributed access to the software, and then on the B2C side, this just like expectation of I want it now and I want it all. What aided that, right? That's tough stuff to predict, but along the way you have to experiment and you have to play with this stuff proactively, because someone, as we saw, went and bet on that, and the model ultimately won and played out. And so those are a couple examples of like macro markets that were aided by technology that completely disrupted what we were used to doing 20 years ago.
Exactly, and just to build on that, I think what traditionally happened in the industry is that financial services or any other bigger organizations, telcos, naturally were always very hesitant to experiment and be early adopters of the things like cloud, right, like SaaS. And that brought to the place where you actually, you are running very much behind, right? And you wait until everyone will become a majority adopters and only then embark on that. And usually that's already a bit too late. So I think, again, bringing back again the same topic of adaptability, if organization would change their mindset a little bit and pick the right area where they can experiment, end-to-end experiment, not just do some lab experimentation within the organization, but really launch something end-to-end into the market, completely brand new, based on new principles, test it out, see how it works, learn from that, and then see how you can actually spread this across your organization in step-by-step, in small pieces, in small iterations. That would be a complete game changer, right? And starts with the mindset again, right? It starts with the understanding that you should be able to take risks. And of course, you cannot risk your entire business. That's not going to work. But you should pick the areas in your business where you believe you will get most of the benefit, or face least of a risk, and you can still try and adopt new technology, see what opportunities it brings you, and then see how this can be used broader. I think that's the fundamental change that needs to happen in the traditional industry. Really looking at thinking in bets, thinking in experiments, trying to adopt early technologies in a specific area of your business where it couldn't really negatively impact you too much in the beginning.
So building on your points then about the experimentation and about how we should take it forward and how we need to help these more traditional organisations to become more SaaS ready. So bringing it back into Mambu as the leads of the product and the technology organisations, what best practices have you ingrained in your parts of the organisation to make sure that we as Mambu continue to be successful?
Absolutely. So from the mindset perspective and the culture perspective, there's probably nothing much to say, because we emerged naturally as a tech company with all these principles ingrained very much in how we do things. Looking at processes, obviously, we do things in a very much agile way, in short iterations, learning not only in terms of whether the thing we are building, the thing we are doing is the right thing to do, but also, did we do it in the right way? Is there anything we can do to improve the way we did things? Is there anything we can improve in our processes, in our culture, in the way how we interact with each other, in the way how we run meetings, in the way how we plan our day, to facilitate that further, to improve that further, to run on this continuous improvement journey. From a technology perspective, again, same thing, right? It's the continuous evolution. So we are looking at our architecture every day and looking at what needs to be changed, and elevating our technology and architecture to further and further reinforce these principles of decoupledness, of being able to adapt to ever-changing business strategy, to ever-changing context, to ever-changing environment. Right. So that's how we do these things.
Yeah, I think from my side, it's making sure that we have a set of people that are looking at the market independent of what we're building today. And we'll use a couple other examples in our industry of, like, what does crypto mean to our business? Or what does crypto mean to the financial institution? There's been another big disruptive force there, obviously, of a new currency and new companies that are really focused on that. And who knows how that all plays out in 10 years against the traditional financial services companies. But if you take a topic as broad of that, you need to build a model in your mind that says, okay, with what we do in our market and with this trend, what are a couple scenarios that we can identify that we have to consider? So that activity is very different than what is the next feature I'm going to build. And to Ben's side, at some point, he's got to look at that from a technology and from a delivery side and say, if that came in and was this couple things, what in the architecture or what in the core technology that we have in our platform do we need to consider? Or it just might be a new product. But if you don't start to look at that at a fairly high level, broad way, and extract what I call the strategic takeaways or the assumptions, then you can't even have that conversation. It becomes too big of a thing to digest. So you need organizationally and product to have someone that's looking at that and feeding that into the thinkers at the different areas of the product and the platform, and then consider it in that way. So that's one structural thing I'd say. And then ultimately, what we're looking at here are trends, products, and platform. And those are a very tightly coupled function when you start to think about what are you going to build over the next 5 years. And so you got to have a 5-year plan, you got to have a 1-year plan, you got to have a next quarter plan. And those are the 3 windows of operating any business in an agile way. And you've got to consider that the level of ambiguity and risk increases as you push out in the further path. But if you don't have people looking at that, whether it's R&D or just strategy, it's going to come too fast when you have to react. And to pick up and address a trend from standstill is next to impossible because it's extremely reactive and people have already been doing it. focused doing it too. And the velocity of that's just way too fast for your organization. And we can see numerous examples of that where it's happened, as we talked about earlier. So that's, I think, structurally some of the things we're doing. And again, that doesn't take away from keeping the core customers happy and doing everything you need to do there, but you've got to have this other stage in the company that's looking at this stuff.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Kevin. And thank you to the audience for listening. I hope we have helped you understand how to ingrain extreme adaptability into your products in your business. Thank you.